Okay, hello everyone. So today I want to talk about what happened in Greece in the 300s BC after the Peloponnesian War. And the biggest thing to remember is even though there's a lot going on, what they end up doing is essentially one city-state becomes powerful and then the rest attack it and bring it down, and one gets powerful, the rest attack it and bring it down. And essentially what they do is they set up the conditions for Alexander the Great and his father Philip to invade Greece and take it over. So that's what I'll be talking about today. Now, again, there's lots of details about what's going on. I'll tell you sort of what is the more important things to remember. And of course, we talked about this in the last lecture about after the Peloponnesian War, where there was still a lot of tension between Athens and Sparta. And of course, Sparta had won the Peloponnesian War. And what you find is that Sparta starts to do something very similar to what Athens did. So you've got one of their kings named Lysander, and he installed oligarchies, which are, of course, groups of people in control, or sometimes he even put military governors with garrisons of Spartan troops in these areas that he's now controlling. The one big issue is that they did have allies, and these are the allies that we found before during the Peloponnesian War, Corinth and Thebes. They received very little during this time, which of course did not make them very happy. And then Sparta starts requiring tribute to be paid to them. So if this sounds like history repeating itself, this is definitely what's going on, where you've got Athens, who created its Athenian empire, totally collapsed. You've got Sparta doing the same thing. Now, Persia gets involved quite a few times during this period. So I've given you a list here. You've got Darius II died in 405, and he's got two sons, and Artaxerxes II, who really takes power, and then you've got Cyrus the Younger. Now, these two are going to clash, as we're going to find out. And I put on the last slide that Cyrus the Younger was put in charge of Asia Minor. Now, he makes the decision that he wants to be the king of Persia. So what he ends up doing is grabbing a bunch of Greek mercenaries, some of them from the area that he actually controls. Some of them were Spartans, and then he decides to invade Persia. So this happened in 401 BC, and he's got at least 10,000 Greek mercenaries with him. What's really interesting is we have a sort of a first-hand account by a man named Xenophon. He writes a work called The Persian Expeditions, and he talks about what happened. Now, in the next slide, I'll show you a map of this. But Cyrus the Younger invades Persia, goes deep into Persia, and it's just one big debacle after the rest, and he gets killed. The Greeks then have to escape from Persia, and I will show you the map here in just a bit. Now, right after this, Sparta decides to send troops to Asia Minor to help retake the area. Now, this was only successful for a couple of years. Now, this map talks about the direction that Cyrus the Younger went, and then this is sort of the escape route that the Spartans, or that the Greeks had to follow. And remember, they're in Persian territory, and they're being hounded every single step that they go. It was a pretty terrible time. Okay, then you've got something called the Corinthian War that happened soon after this. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. One city-state rises up, becomes powerful, the next attack it and bring it down. And this is what happens during this period. You've got Persia, who under the main king, Artaxerxes II, tries to create an anti-Spartan alliance. Now, that's because the Spartans helped quite a bit with the Cyrus the Younger invasion. And of course, I just told you that the Spartans sent troops to Asia Minor. So they send gold and envoys to Corinth and Argos, who of course are unhappy with the Spartan Empire when they didn't really get anything. And then you've got the Peloponnese being attacked in 395, and you've got Xenophon talking about this. So Sparta doesn't just sit around and take this. They invade Boeotia, which is just north of Athens. They're defeated, and their general Lysander is killed during this time. Now, Athens takes advantage of this. So 1 year later, under someone named Conon, he defeated the Spartan navy, and what he did was he then asked Persia to give them money. And so Persia sent money. Athens ended up building a new fleet and then rebuilding the long walls that were taken apart in the conditions after the Peloponnesian War. So you do have something called the King's Peace, which doesn't last very long. The Spartans rise up again. They defeat Athens and the Athenians. And the Spartans then sign a peace treaty with Persia. And this is really interesting because they exchange some things. Persia can have Asia Minor, which of course is packed full of Greek city-states, and while Spartan can control Greece without worrying about Persia. And then the Persians say, great, they stop sending money to Athens, and then they start sending money to Sparta. So this must have been a pretty terrible time to be living in Greece because it just keeps going from one city-state in control to another. And then the Spartans go up, and the Persians go up and they recontrol the Hellespont. Then you get the Spartan Empire rising up once again. And they take control of Thebes. Some of the democratic leaders were killed. Some of these leaders fled to Athens. And then you've got sort of the turnaround again with the liberation of Thebes and kicking out Sparta. And again, remember, I know I'm going through a lot of details, but the main point of talking about this is to show you how the conditions in Greece really leads to the perfect conditions for Macedonia under Philip II, and then later his son Alexander the Greek, to take control. And this is just a map showing you the area, who's in control during this particular period. Then you've got something called the Second Athenian Empire that was brought up. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these points, but you do find Athens making alliances with a number of previous enemies to Sparta. And the same thing happens as we talked about in the First Athenian Empire, where it's not so much that Athens is in total control, but the Athenians have to approve any legislation that the new council makes. They control the new league, and it's just sort of, again, history repeating itself. So after this, you've got the Boeotian League, where Boeotia rises up and becomes the main power, at least for a few years. You've got Sparta trying to invade Boeotia, and then they ended up failing. You've got this peace in 371, which isn't quite a real peace. And of course, the king of Sparta refuses to recognize the Boeotian League, and the whole cycle starts all over again. Now, this is a period when Thebes becomes the main power in Greece in 371 to 362. They controlled a good part of the Peloponnese, and remember, Sparta is in the southern part of the Peloponnese. They started something called the Akkadian League. They invaded Messenia, which is on the western side of Sparta. And then what they ended up doing is they didn't want an oligarchy, they didn't want kings, they wanted the leaders to be democratic. So they made all the allies then. And by 366, the Peloponnesian League really had no reason to exist, and it was disbanded. And then here's just a map showing you the Peloponnese. Let me get my little hider. So here's Messenia, here's the northern part of Peloponnese, and of course here you've got Sparta. And then Athens didn't like the rise of Thebes, and Sparta certainly didn't like it. In 362, Athens and Sparta became allies and fought against Thebes. You've got their famous Epaminondas being killed. Thebes was defeated, and then the Boeotian League was torn apart. So again, one rises up, the others raise up and push it down. Now, Athens had the same experience in something called the Social War, which was 357 to 355. Athens ended up doing what it did before during the Peloponnesian War. Remember, we talked about klerouches, which were military garrisons put in some of the city-states. So they ended up doing this again. Some of the court cases in the Athenian allies were brought to Athens. And again, we talked about this during the Peloponnesian War and how terrible it was for Athens. And many city-states decided to rebel against Athens. There's a famous king called Mausolus, which is where we get the word mausoleum from because his funeral monument was massive. So many city-states in Asia Minor, many islands in the Aegean rebelled against Athens, and Athens started to go down again in power. And then in 355, you've got the Second Athenian League disappearing. And again, remember, the whole reason I talked about a lot of these details is to really drive home the point that Athens and Sparta and all the other city-states could not really control themselves during this period. They wanted to control all of Greece, and it didn't work. And what it essentially did was create the conditions for Greece to be invaded. And I will talk about that in the next lecture.